Is this a song? A question the man who knew music best supposedly asked, or perhaps didn't, to the only other man who could match him. John and Paul were usually described as opponents. But what happened inside the studio was more tangled than that. They didn't oppose each other, they unraveled each other. Every time John walked in, what he brought wasn't quite a song. 3 unrelated fragments, a recording request no machine could fulfill. 2 tapes in incompatible keys at incompatible speeds. Lyrics with the meaning deliberately removed. And finally a whole 24 bars of nothing. Paul turned it into music. Sighing, half laughing, never putting down his pen. The 5 songs in this video were born from exactly that kind of session. One thing first, the 5th song has a 24-bar gap in the middle. John said he wanted something there, he just didn't know what. What Paul put inside it is where this is all heading. Stay until the end. Let's start with the song that forced Paul to change direction. 3 times inside a single track. Order inside the wreckage. Happiness is a warm gun. Summer 1968, Abbey Road Studios. John spread 3 scraps of paper across the table. This is one song, 3 pieces, 3 completely different ideas. The first a slow, dreamy ballad. The second a tight doo-wop riff straight out of the 1950s. The third a hard-charging rock climax. No shared key, no shared time signature, no shared mood. Ringo looked at it and said, "Where do I even come in?" The time signature kept shifting, 44 into 54, then 98, then 108. Every musical instinct told them it shouldn't hold together. The band kept stopping, losing the rhythm mid-phrase, starting again, losing it again. Recording time 15 hours. Take count 95. Almost no Beatles track required that kind of endurance. What Paul did was build a floor beneath all 3 worlds. He laid bass lines that gave each section its own gravitational center. Different enough to honor John's chaos. Consistent enough to keep the whole thing from collapsing. There was no blueprint. The only person with a picture of the finished song was John. Paul was handed the materials and told to build it. 95 takes later, the song was done. And the chaos stayed. The listener can't predict what comes next. That's exactly why they can't stop listening. John described it himself, years later. "I put together 3 sections of different songs. Seemed to run through all the different kinds of music I like." He had no interest in resolving the contradiction. He just wanted someone to hold it together. For a band to survive 3 genres in one song, everyone needs to be standing on the same ground. No matter what changes above, the line Paul drew with his bass had to hold. What he was doing wasn't really composing. It was closer to structural engineering. Laying a foundation, then making sure nothing falls. As a footnote, this same approach, stitching disparate genres into a single track, is said to have influenced Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. In 1975, Freddie faced the same problem: how do you put a ballad, an opera, and hard rock inside one song? Ringo's question was apparently still unanswered. That was just the beginning. Next the night John walked in with a request. No recording equipment on earth could deliver. Make it sound like 100 Monks. Tomorrow never knows. April 1966, Abbey Road. John stood in the center of the room, eyes closed, and told producer George Martin what he wanted. "I want it to sound like 100 Tibetan monks chanting on a mountaintop." Martin waited. What John described wasn't a musical direction. It was an image, and no microphone in that building could capture it. The song's structure was equally extreme. 1 chord, C, for the entire track. The drum pattern was a single loop, repeated. The lyrics came straight from Timothy Leary's The Psychedelic Experience itself, an adaptation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. John didn't write the words so much as copy them. That was the point. Engineer Jeff Emmerich found the solution: run John's vocal through a Leslie speaker, the rotating cabinet wired to a Hammond organ. The internal rotation blurred and spun the voice until it sounded like it was arriving from somewhere very far away. A voice dissolving into machinery, into fog. Meanwhile, Paul had been building tape loops at home. Strange sounds cut from tape and twisted into circles. 16 of them. The studio didn't have enough machines to run them all at once. So staff were pulled in from the hallway and handed pencils, then told to hold the tape taut as it threaded through the machines. People standing from one end of the corridor to the other, keeping the loops in tension with their hands. That technique, layered, looping, nonlinear sound, became the technical blueprint for sampling, for electronic music, for entire genres that hadn't been named yet. Years later, John said, in the background, you'd hear thousands of monks chanting. Now I realize that's what it needed. What was recorded was already beyond what anyone had made before. For John, it was still a compromise. What's strange is how simple the song actually is. One chord, one loop, and yet people who hear it feel like they've gone somewhere else entirely. Not complexity, repetition, and fog, creating a sensation. It may have been John's attempt to recreate something he'd felt, but couldn't explain. The experiment freed Paul to go somewhere else entirely. Next the night something physically impossible happened in the editing room. 2 tapes that shouldn't fit, Strawberry Fields Forever. Late 1966, the editing room at Abbey Road. 2 reels of tape on the table. Take 7, a quiet acoustic version. Key of B, slow. Take 26, a dense orchestral remake. Key of C, faster. John listened to both, then said, I love the beginning of the first one. I love the end of the second. Join them. Martin and engineer Jeff Emmerich stared at each other in silence. Different keys, different tempos. On tape, here's the physics. Speeding up tape raises its pitch. Slowing it down lowers it. Speed take 7 up slightly and B rises. Slow take 26 slightly and C descends. At some point between those adjustments, the 2 keys might meet. The question was whether the tempos would align at that exact same point. They did. Slow take 26 by exactly 11.5%, and both the key and tempo of the 2 recordings match at a single moment. The edit point is at 059 in the released version, on the word, going. That's where the cellos enter. The join is almost impossible to hear. John's instinct, I want both, turned out to be not just possible, but perfect. When someone later pointed out the splice, John apparently said, see, told you it would work. The person making the request always assumes it can be done. The only one worried about whether it's possible is the one who has to do it. Around this same time, Paul was finishing another song. The night before a session, he'd watched the BBC broadcast of Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 2 and heard something. I was watching the Brandenburg Concerto the night before the session, he said. There's this tiny high trumpet Bach uses. That's it. That's what I want. The next day, trumpeter David Mason arrived at Abbey Road. Penny Lane was finished with a piccolo trumpet solo. In February 1967, both songs were released as a double A-side. Critics called it the greatest single in rock history. While John was splicing 2 incompatible tapes, Paul had gone back to Bach. They were moving at full speed in completely opposite directions. Up to this point, John's strangeness was structural. Next he destroyed meaning itself. It doesn't mean. It's all nonsense. I am the Walrus. 1967. John received a letter from a student at Quarry Bank High School, his old school. The message their English teacher was using Beatles lyrics as a text for literary analysis in class. John's response was immediate. Right, I'll write something they can't analyze. That was the entire brief for I Am the Walrus. The song was built from 3 unfinished fragments, with the meaning deliberately removed. The Eggman refers to no one. John later confirmed it. It could have been the pudding bawin' for all I care. The hook, goo goo gee, joob, is a string of sounds with no referent. Near the end of the track, a BBC radio broadcast bleeds in. Not planned, just a signal that happened to be in the room, collaged on the spot. The chord sequence descending by half steps through B, A, G, F, E runs against every instinct a trained musician has. The band ran through it again and again. Each descending step unsettled them a little. They kept going until the unsettling felt natural. Paul led the rehearsals. He drilled the entire band through the chord changes, arranged the orchestra around John's deliberate incoherence without dismantling it. The most methodical person in the room was working to perfect deliberate nonsense. Later, English literature scholars published academic papers analyzing the song's hidden meaning. John said, people have drawn all sorts of conclusions. I've been in a jokey mood the whole time. A song its author described as pure nonsense became the most carefully read song in the catalog. The thing stripped of meaning became the densest object in the room. John was probably the most surprised. There's an irony in the chain of events. A teacher told students to analyze lyrics. A student wrote to the songwriter. The songwriter responded by writing the most deliberately unanalyzable thing he could. That thing is now the subject of academic dissertations. John's prank completed a full circuit and landed in the one place he probably least expected. That's the fourth song. All four of them. John brought something: fragments, requests, nonsense. The fifth is different. What John brought was a whole. The 24-bar whole. A Day in the Life. January 1967. Abbey Road. John played through the song's skeleton on acoustic guitar. 2 newspaper stories turned directly into lyrics. A small article about a nobleman's son killed in a car accident. A report on potholes in the road. He cut both out and put them together. The verses were there. The choruses were there. Then the music stopped. 24 bars. Empty. I want something here, John said. I just don't know what. Paul raised his hand. He had a fragment, something he'd been working on separately. A piece about his own school days. Getting up, missing the bus, the small, dull machinery of an ordinary morning. He offered it as a bridge. A grand, heavy song, and in the middle of it, a hazy Monday morning. The contrast did something nothing deliberate could have. The remaining problem: what to do with the orchestral 24-bar climb. Paul's solution was an instruction, not a score. Start on the lowest note of your instrument. End on the highest. Get there however you want. The only rule is lowest to highest. 40 musicians, each ascending at their own pace, through the full range of their instrument. Recorded twice and layered. No 2 people hitting the same note at the same time. There was no sheet music. Paul gave the musicians a boundary, then trusted what would happen inside it. The final chord, 3 pianos struck simultaneously. It takes 45 seconds to decay into silence. Inside the studio, the people gathered around those 3 pianos, held still, holding their breath, waiting for the sound to disappear. 45 seconds is longer than it sounds. Rolling Stone named A Day in the Life the greatest song ever recorded. The 24-bar hole that John couldn't fill, Paul filled it. And neither of them could have done it alone. John brought a hole. Paul returned a Monday morning. Into that, 40 musicians ascended at their own speeds, and 3 pianos spent 45 seconds going quiet. It started with 2 newspaper clippings. John ran out of road in the middle, but it finished. That's the whole story of the song. Conclusion. 5 songs, 1 pattern. John broke the structure. Paul built it back. 95 takes to sort out the rhythm. 2 tapes joined at a single 11.5% adjustment. A chord progression made of nonsense, drilled into the whole band by heart. A 24-bar hole filled with a Monday morning. Without either of them, none of these songs exist. Without John, the frame stays narrow. Without Paul, the frame never becomes a building. Not opposition, complement. What runs through all 5 songs is the balance between the one who unravels and the one who assembles. When John said, "Make it like a circus," Paul drew the blueprints for the circus. Frustrated, exasperated, but he drew them. That's why these songs hold up 6 decades later. John was often called eccentric because he kept making demands without ever presenting a finished vision. Yet it was precisely that uncertainty that drew out sounds no one had ever heard before. That tension between the undefined and the realized helped move music history forward. And it was Paul who gave that raw idea its shape. One question of the 5 songs today: which one struck you as the most out there? Leave the title in the comments. That's all. Thank you for watching.